Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the heart of Navarra, a world blanketed in endless snow and ice, life was defined by the cold. For centuries, the people of this frozen land had lived in fear of the fire, a power so feared that it was forbidden under pain of death. The rulers of Navarra, known as the Frost Guard, enforced this law with an iron fist, ensuring that the cold remained the dominant force in the world. Irina was only a child when she first discovered the dangerous secret she carried within her. She remembered it vividly, her mother's gentle hand guiding hers over a small flame, teaching her to control the fire that danced from her fingertips. But that moment of wonder quickly turned to horror when her mother was discovered and taken by the Frost Guard. Irina was left alone with her father, a man who was now tasked with protecting his daughter from a similar fate. The village of Ilarion, where Irina and her father lived, was nestled high in the mountains. It was a quiet place, far removed from the eyes of the Frost Guard. The villagers lived simple lives, farming what little they could from the frozen soil, and hunting the scarce game that roamed the snowy forests. For Irina, life was a delicate balancing act. She spent her days helping her father in his blacksmith shop, where the heat of the forge was the only warmth in the cold, unforgiving world. But even there, she had to be careful. A single spark could betray her secret. Her father, Eirik, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by years of toil. His hands, rough and calloused from working the forge, were surprisingly gentle when he trained Irina. He taught her to channel her power, to control it, and to hide it. Every evening, after the sun had set and the village was asleep, they would retreat to a hidden clearing in the forest where Irina could practice her fire magic away from prying eyes. Irina, her father would say, his voice a low rumble that matched the crackle of the fire, you must never let anyone see this. The world is not ready for fire again. They will fear you, and fear leads to violence. Irina understood the danger, but as she grew older, so too did the power within her. It was a constant presence, like a second heartbeat, always there, just beneath the surface. There were times when she could feel the fire wanting to break free, especially in moments of fear or anger. But she heeded her father's warnings and kept it hidden, knowing that her life depended on it. One day, when Irina was 16, the quiet of Ilarion was shattered. The sky, once a pale blue, turned dark as thick clouds rolled in from the north. The villagers, sensing something was wrong, hurried to their homes. Irina was in the forge, stoking the fire for her father when she felt it, a deep, bone-chilling cold that made her shiver despite the heat of the flames. Her father burst into the forge, his face pale. Irina, we must go. Now. She didn't need to ask why. She could see the fear in his eyes, a fear she had never seen before. They ran from the forge, through the snow-covered streets, and into the village square. The villagers were gathered there, staring up at the sky in terror, and then she saw it, the ice dragon. It was a creature of legend, a beast said to have been born from the coldest winter, a harbinger of doom. Its scales were as white as the snow, its eyes like shards of ice. It flew low over the village, its massive wings beating slowly, causing the very air to freeze in its wake. The dragon opened its maw, and a stream of icy breath shot forth, freezing everything in its path. Houses crumbled under the weight of the ice, and the villagers screamed as they tried to flee. Irina's heart pounded in her chest as she watched in horror. This was no ordinary dragon, this was a force of nature, a being of pure cold and death. Eirik pulled Irina close, his voice urgent. We must hide. It's looking for something. Irina knew what he meant. The dragon wasn't here by chance. It was searching for fire. It was searching for her, but before they could move, the dragon swooped down, its icy breath aimed directly at them. Eirik pushed Irina out of the way, taking the full force of the attack. Irina screamed as her father was encased in ice, his body frozen solid in an instant. "No," she cried, rushing to his side, but it was too late. He was gone. The dragon turned its attention to her, its icy eyes narrowing. Irina's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she realized there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The fire inside her surged, desperate to escape, to protect her. She tried to hold it back, but it was too strong. As the dragon's icy breath closed in, Irina finally let go. Flames erupted from her hands, forming a barrier of heat that met the dragon's cold head-on. The two forces clashed, fire and ice battling for dominance. The villagers watched in awe and terror as Irina stood her ground, her flames pushing back the dragon's breath, but the dragon was relentless. It roared in fury, its wings beating harder as it tried to overpower her. Irina's strength was waning, she could feel it. The fire inside her was strong, but it was not enough. The dragon was too powerful. In a final, desperate act, Irina called upon all the fire she had, summoning a blazing inferno that engulfed the dragon. The beast roared in pain as the flames consumed it, and with one last, mighty beat of its wings, it took to the sky and fled, leaving the village in ruins. Irina collapsed to the ground, exhausted. The flames around her died down, leaving only the charred remains of the village and the frozen statue of her father. She had saved the villagers, but at what cost? The secret she had kept for so long was now out. The Frost Guard would come for her, and when they did, there would be no mercy. The villagers approached her cautiously, their faces a mix of gratitude and fear. They had seen what she could do, and while she had saved them, they also knew what the Frost Guard would do if they found out. "Irina," one of the elders said, his voice trembling, "you must leave. The Frost Guard will come, and they will destroy us all if they know you are here." Irina looked at the frozen body of her father, her heart heavy with grief. She knew they were right. She couldn't stay. The village was no longer safe for her or for anyone. With a heavy heart, she took one last look at her home and then turned to leave. She had nowhere to go, but she knew she couldn't stay. She had to find a way to control her power, to understand it, before it consumed her and everything she loved. As she made her way out of the village, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see a man standing behind her, his face partially hidden by a hood. "Irina," he said, his voice low and calm. "You need to come with me." "Who are you?" she asked, wary. "My name is Kale," he replied. "I used to be part of the Frost Guard, but I left when I learned the truth. The truth about you, about fire magic. There's a place where you can learn to control your power, where others like you are hiding. I can take you there." Irina hesitated. She didn't trust him, but what choice did she have? She couldn't stay here, and she couldn't go back. If there was even a chance that she could learn to control her power, she had to take it. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll go with you." Kale nodded and led her into the forest. They traveled in silence, the only sounds the crunching of snow under their feet and the distant howling of the wind. Irina couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as they walked deeper into the wilderness. She was leaving everything she knew behind, venturing into the unknown with a man she barely knew, but there was something about Kale that intrigued her. He moved with a quiet confidence, and there was a warmth in his voice that made her want to trust him. As they walked, he told her more about the Frost Guard and the history of fire magic. "Fire magic wasn't always forbidden," Kale explained. "There was a time when fire and ice existed in balance. But the world changed. The cold grew stronger, and the Frost Guard rose to power. They feared fire because they couldn't control it, so they outlawed it. They hunted down anyone who showed even the slightest sign of flame magic. But why? Irina asked. Why are they so afraid of fire? Because fire has the power to change everything, Kale replied. It's not just a tool or a weapon. It's life itself. The Frost Guard know that if fire were to rise again, it would challenge their rule. It would bring warmth, life, and renewal to a world they want to keep frozen and under their control. Irina listened intently, her mind racing. Everything she had been taught about fire magic was being turned on its head. She had always seen it as a curse, something to be feared and hidden. But now, she began to see it as something more, a gift, a force of change that could bring new life to the world. As they traveled, Kale taught Irina more about controlling her fire magic. He showed her how to focus her energy, how to channel it without letting it consume her. She practiced every night, and slowly, she began to feel more in control. But the journey was not without danger. The Frost Guard were relentless in their pursuit. They tracked Irina and Kale through the mountains, their numbers growing with each passing day. Irina could feel them getting closer, and she knew that a confrontation was inevitable. Finally, after weeks of travel, they reached their destination, a hidden sanctuary deep in the mountains. It was a place of ancient magic, where the remnants of the fire god's power still lingered. The sanctuary was protected by powerful wards, keeping it hidden from the outside world. As they entered the sanctuary, Irina felt a surge of energy. The air was warm, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse with life. For the first time in her life, she felt truly at home. But the sanctuary was not empty. Other fire mages lived there, hiding from the Frost Guard. They welcomed Irina with open arms, recognizing her as one of their own. They told her stories of the old world, before the Frost Guard's rule, when fire and ice coexisted in harmony. Irina learned that she was not just any fire mage, she was the one foretold in an ancient prophecy. The prophecy spoke of a flame bearer who would rise to challenge the Frost Guard and restore balance to the world. Irina was that flame bearer, and her destiny was to bring about a new age of fire and ice. But destiny was a heavy burden. Irina struggled with the weight of the prophecy, unsure if she was ready to fulfill it. She trained tirelessly, honing her skills, but doubt lingered in her heart. What if she failed? What if she brought only destruction? Her doubts were put to the test sooner than she expected. The Frost Guard found the sanctuary, their battalion led by a ruthless commander named Varen. Varen was known for his cruelty and his obsession with eradicating fire magic. He had tracked Irina for weeks, determined to capture her and end the prophecy once and for all. The sanctuary was under siege. Irina and the other fire mages fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. Varen's forces were relentless, their cold magic overpowering the fire mages at every turn. As the battle raged on, Irina found herself face to face with Varen. He was a tall, imposing figure, his eyes like chips of ice. He wielded a sword of pure cold, its blade glowing with a pale blue light. I've been waiting for this moment, Varen sneered. The last of the fire mages, and the one who thinks she can defy fate. You are nothing but a child playing with fire, and I will snuff you out. Irina's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. She called upon all the fire within her, summoning a blazing inferno that surrounded her. The heat was intense, the flames roaring like a living beast. Varen's cold magic clashed with Irina's fire, the two forces battling for supremacy. The ground shook beneath them, the air crackling with energy. Irina's fire was strong, but Varen's cold was unyielding. He pushed forward, his sword cutting through the flames, inching closer and closer. Irina's strength was failing. She could feel the cold creeping in, sapping her energy. But she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. In a final, desperate act, Irina unleashed the full extent of her power. Flames erupted from her, engulfing Varen and everything around them. The heat was so intense that the very air seemed to catch fire. The sanctuary trembled, the walls cracking and crumbling under the force of the explosion. When the flames finally died down, Irina stood alone in the ruins of the sanctuary. Varen was gone, his body consumed by the fire. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The sanctuary was destroyed, and the other fire mages had perished in the battle. Irina collapsed to the ground, exhausted and grief-stricken. She had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. She had lost so much: her home, her father, and now her newfound family. The prophecy had come true, but at what cost? As she sat in the ruins, she felt a presence beside her. It was Kale, wounded but alive. He knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You defeated Varen. You fulfilled the prophecy." Irina shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But I lost everything. What was the point? What did I save?" Kale looked out at the desolate landscape, the cold and the fire still battling for control. "You saved the world, Irina. The balance is broken, but it can be restored. You have the power to do it." Irina looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "But how? How can I fix this?" Kale took her hand, his voice steady and calm. "There is a way. The fire god's power still resides within you. You can use it to restore the balance. But it will require a great sacrifice." Irina knew what he meant. She had seen it in the prophecy, in the ancient texts she had studied. To restore the balance, she would have to give up her own life. It was a choice she never wanted to make, but she knew it was the only way. The world needed balance, and only she could provide it. With Kale's help, Irina made her way to the highest peak in the mountains, where the last remnants of the ice god's power resided. The climb was arduous, the cold biting at her skin, but she pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was the only way. At the peak, she stood before a great altar of ice, the air around it crackling with energy. This was the place where the balance could be restored, where fire and ice could be reunited. Irina placed her hands on the altar, feeling the power within her surge. The flames that had been her constant companion flared up, but this time, she didn't fight them. She let them flow through her, merging with the cold of the ice altar. The pain was excruciating, as if her very soul was being torn apart. But she held on, focusing on the image of a world in balance, a world where fire and ice could coexist. As the power reached its peak, Irina felt herself fading. Her body was burning away, consumed by the fire she had unleashed. But she didn't resist. She embraced it, knowing that this was her destiny. In her final moments, she saw the world around her change. The flames and the ice merged, creating a new equilibrium. The cold subsided, the heat mellowed, and the land began to heal. The harsh, barren landscape gave way to new life, a world where both fire and ice could thrive. And then, there was nothing. Irina's consciousness faded, her body dissolving into the very elements she had sought to balance. Her sacrifice had brought about a new age for Nivara, a world no longer dominated by cold, but one where warmth and life could flourish once more. Kale watched as the world transformed before his eyes. The ice that had once covered everything receded, revealing fertile ground beneath. Streams of water, once frozen, began to flow, bringing life to the land. The air, once cold and biting, became crisp and refreshing. He knew that Irina was gone, but her legacy would live on. The world she had saved would remember her as the flame-bearer, the one who had restored the balance and brought about a new era of peace and prosperity. With a heavy heart, Kale turned away from the altar and began the long journey back to the village. He would tell the people of Ilarion what Irina had done, how she had saved them all. And he would ensure that her story would be passed down through the generations, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the enduring power of fire. As he walked, he felt a warmth in his chest, a small flicker of hope. The world had changed, but it was not the end. It was a new beginning, a chance for the people of Navarra to rebuild, to create a world where fire and ice could coexist in harmony. And in the distance, on the highest peak of the mountains, a single flame burned brightly, a symbol of Irina's sacrifice and the new dawn she had brought to the world.